It starts suddenly, not as a voice you hear, but as a feeling you cannot explain. Something inside you just paused, and in that pause, there is a message. Humans often ignore inner warnings even when they feel urgent because the mind is designed to prioritize comfort over truth in the short term. When something emotionally uncomfortable arises, the psyche does not immediately treat it as important information. Instead, it filters it through fear, avoidance, or distraction. This creates a situation where the inner warning is felt clearly but consciously dismissed. It is not a lack of awareness, but a conflict between awareness and resistance. The unconscious mind continuously picks up subtle signals from experience, memory, and emotion, forming impressions before logic can fully process them. These impressions often appear as intuition, gut feelings, sudden discomfort, or unexplained tension. However, when these signals threaten emotional stability or challenge existing beliefs, the conscious mind tends to suppress them to maintain psychological balance. Over time, this suppression becomes habitual, and a person learns to ignore what they actually sense in favor of what feels easier to accept. This is why people often say, "I had a feeling, but I didn't listen." The feeling was never unclear. It was simply overridden. The mind also uses rationalization as a defense, creating explanations that make ignoring the warning feel reasonable. Emotional attachment further complicates this process because it can distort perception, making someone believe that what they feel cannot be trusted. Yet the inner warning does not disappear. It accumulates pressure and returns in different forms, such as recurring thoughts, anxiety, or emotional restlessness. The stronger the avoidance, the louder the internal signal becomes, not because it changes, but because it is repeatedly ignored. This creates a cycle where awareness and denial coexist, producing inner tension that the person cannot fully understand until they stop resisting what they already sense. The unconscious mind communicates through symbols, dreams, and intuition because it does not use structured language like the conscious mind. It operates in images, emotions, sensations, and patterns that must be interpreted rather than directly understood. When the conscious mind is quiet, especially during sleep or moments of emotional openness, these inner signals become more noticeable. Dreams, for example, are not random stories. They are symbolic expressions of unresolved thoughts, emotions, and experiences. A person or situation in a dream may not represent itself literally, but may stand for a deeper emotional truth the mind is processing. Intuition works in a similar way, but in a more immediate form. It often appears as a sudden knowing without clear reasoning, because it is built from accumulated unconscious observations that the conscious mind has not fully analyzed. These signals can feel vague or difficult to explain, yet they often carry emotional accuracy that logic may later confirm. Symbols in daily life also become part of this communication system. Repeated numbers, recurring situations, or strong emotional reactions to specific triggers can all reflect patterns from the unconscious. The mind uses these indirect methods because direct confrontation of hidden emotions can be overwhelming. Instead of forcing awareness, it gradually reveals what is buried through metaphor and feeling. However, modern life encourages constant distraction and rational thinking, which weakens the ability to notice these subtle messages. As a result, people often dismiss dreams or intuition as meaningless, even though they may contain important psychological information. The unconscious does not stop communicating simply because it is ignored. It adjusts its intensity, often becoming stronger or more repetitive until it gains attention. This is why certain emotions or themes keep resurfacing in different forms throughout a person's experiences. Emotional avoidance becomes stronger than logical understanding because emotions operate faster and deeper than reasoning. The human brain is not primarily designed to seek truth in a detached way. It is designed to protect emotional stability and survival. When a thought or situation creates discomfort, fear, sadness, or uncertainty, the emotional brain reacts immediately, often before logic has time to analyze it. In that moment, avoidance feels safer than understanding. Even when a person intellectually knows what is true, their emotional system may resist accepting it because acceptance would require facing pain, loss, or vulnerability. This creates a split between what is known and what is felt. The mind then develops strategies to reduce emotional pressure, such as distraction, denial, justification, or minimization. These strategies temporarily restore comfort, but they also prevent deeper clarity. Over time, avoidance becomes a habit, and the brain begins to prioritize emotional relief over accuracy. This is why people can repeatedly avoid situations they logically know they should confront. Emotional memory also plays a role, because past experiences shape present reactions. If a situation resembles a previous painful experience, the emotional brain responds as if the danger is current, even when logic says otherwise. This reinforces avoidance even further. The stronger the emotional charge, the weaker logical influence becomes in that moment. This does not mean logic disappears, but it becomes secondary to emotional protection. As a result, people often delay important decisions or ignore inner signals because facing them would require emotional discomfort. The mind chooses short-term relief over long-term clarity, creating a pattern where avoidance feels easier but ultimately leads to repeated internal tension and unresolved emotional cycles that continue until the underlying feeling is acknowledged rather than escaped. People sometimes sense danger or truth, but suppress it because awareness alone is not enough to change behavior when fear or emotional discomfort is involved. The human mind constantly gathers subtle information from surroundings, tone, behavior, patterns, and internal emotional responses. This creates an early sense of something being right or wrong before clear evidence appears. However, when that sense conflicts with desire, attachment, or existing beliefs, the mind enters a state of internal conflict. In this state, one part recognizes the truth, while another part rejects it to maintain emotional stability. Suppression happens as a defense mechanism to reduce anxiety or cognitive dissonance, which is the discomfort of holding two opposing ideas at once. Instead of confronting that tension, the mind often chooses to silence the uncomfortable insight. This is not a lack of perception, but a prioritization of emotional safety over accuracy. People may also fear the consequences of accepting what they sense, because acknowledgement could require action, change, or loss. So the signal is pushed away, rationalized, or reframed into something less threatening. Over time, this suppression becomes automatic, and the person stops trusting their own perception. Yet the original sense does not disappear. It remains active in the background, often resurfacing as anxiety, hesitation, or repeated thoughts. The stronger the emotional investment in a situation, the stronger the suppression tends to be, because the cost of acceptance feels higher. This creates a paradox where people clearly sense something but actively train themselves not to believe it. The result is internal fragmentation, where intuition and behavior no longer align, leading to confusion and repeated cycles of doubt until the suppressed awareness eventually becomes too strong to ignore and demands attention through emotional or psychological pressure. Inner conflict often feels like an unknown voice or pressure because it arises when different parts of the mind are pulling in opposite directions at the same time. One part may be driven by logic, responsibility, or long-term understanding, while another part is influenced by emotion, fear, desire, or attachment. These internal systems do not communicate in clear verbal language, so the experience is translated into sensations rather than structured thoughts. This is why it can feel like a pressure in the chest, a restless mind, or a vague sense of being unsettled without knowing exactly why. The mind attempts to resolve this conflict by generating thoughts that justify one side or the other, but when neither side fully dominates, the tension remains unresolved and is experienced as an internal voice or feeling that something is not settled. This is not an external voice, but a psychological echo created by competing impulses within consciousness. The unconscious contributes additional signals based on past experiences, memories, and unresolved emotions, which further complicates the internal dialogue. Because these elements are not fully accessible to conscious reasoning, they appear as intuition, doubt, or unexplained urgency. The pressure increases when a decision is delayed, since both sides continue to build emotional weight without resolution. Over time, this can feel like being pulled in multiple directions without clarity. The mind may try to silence this tension through distraction or overthinking, but neither approach removes the root cause, which is the unresolved internal disagreement. Instead, the pressure temporarily shifts form, appearing in different thoughts or emotional waves. This is why inner conflict often feels persistent and difficult to explain, because it is not a single thought, but a dynamic interaction between multiple psychological forces operating beneath conscious awareness at the same time. The mind creates patterns to protect itself from emotional pain by organizing experiences into familiar frameworks that feel predictable and manageable. When a person goes through emotional discomfort, uncertainty, or trauma, the brain does not process it as isolated information. Instead, it looks for repetition, similarities, and structure so that future situations can be anticipated and controlled. This pattern building is a survival mechanism because predictability reduces anxiety. However, once these patterns are formed, they can become rigid and automatic, even when they are no longer helpful. For example, if someone experiences emotional rejection, the mind may create a pattern that expects rejection in similar situations, even when the context has changed. This protects the person from being surprised again, but it also limits openness to new experiences. These patterns are not always logical. They are often emotional conclusions drawn from past pain. Over time, the mind begins to filter reality through these internal templates, interpreting new events based on old emotional data. This is why people can react strongly to situations that seem minor on the surface, because the response is actually connected to deeper stored patterns. The unconscious mind plays a major role in maintaining these structures, reinforcing them through memory, emotion, and repetition. When something threatens to break a pattern, the mind often resists it, because breaking the pattern also means confronting uncertainty and vulnerability. Even positive change can feel uncomfortable if it disrupts established emotional structures. As a result, individuals may unconsciously recreate similar situations or relationships, not because they want suffering, but because the familiar pattern feels safer than the unknown. These protective systems operate quietly in the background, shaping perceptions, reactions, and decisions without full awareness until the pattern is recognized and questioned internally. Ignored intuition often returns louder and more intense because it is not a one-time message, but an ongoing internal signal that persists until it is acknowledged. Intuition is formed from the brain's rapid processing of subtle information, emotional memory, and unconscious pattern recognition. When this signal is first felt, it usually appears quiet, subtle, and easy to dismiss because it does not come with clear logical evidence. However, when a person ignores it, the mind does not treat it as resolved. Instead, it continues to monitor the same internal and external cues that generated the feeling in the first place. Each time similar conditions appear, the signal is reactivated and becomes stronger, because the emotional system interprets repeated ignoring as unresolved importance. The intensity increases not because the intuition changes, but because attention is repeatedly withheld from it. The unconscious mind amplifies these signals through repetition, dreams, emotional spikes, or intrusive thoughts, attempting to push awareness toward recognition. This escalation is also linked to psychological tension, where unresolved awareness creates internal pressure that builds over time. The mind tries to restore balance by making the ignored signal harder to dismiss. As a result, what once felt like a quiet suspicion can transform into persistent anxiety or strong emotional discomfort. This is not random escalation, but a structured response from the psyche trying to bring attention to something it considers unresolved. Emotional resistance also contributes because the more a person avoids acknowledging the intuition, the more mental energy is spent suppressing it, which ironically strengthens its presence. Over time, this creates a cycle where ignoring the signal makes it more dominant in thoughts and feelings, until it eventually becomes too persistent to overlook, forcing the mind to finally engage with what it has been resisting internally throughout the process. Emotional attachment can distort perception of reality because it filters how the mind interprets events, people, and situations through a lens of personal desire, fear, or expectation rather than objective observation. When attachment is strong, the emotional significance of a person or outcome becomes more important than the actual signals being received from experience. This creates selective awareness, where the mind tends to notice information that supports the attachment and ignore or minimize information that threatens it. As a result, perception becomes shaped by emotional investment rather than neutral analysis. The brain naturally seeks consistency between what it feels and what it believes. So when reality conflicts with attachment, cognitive dissonance arises. To reduce this discomfort, the mind may reinterpret events in a more acceptable way, even if that interpretation is not fully accurate. This can lead to rationalizing behavior, excusing patterns, or overemphasizing positive moments while downplaying negative ones. Emotional memory also intensifies this distortion because past experiences linked to pleasure or pain become tied to the current attachment, making reactions stronger than the present situation alone would justify. Over time, the person may begin to confuse emotional intensity with truth, assuming that what feels deeply significant must also be accurate. This can blur boundaries between intuition, hope, and reality. Attachment also creates fear of loss, which further clouds perception because the mind becomes protective of the emotional bond rather than objective about its condition. This protective stance can delay acceptance of clear signs or patterns that contradict the attachment. In this state, perception is not fully aligned with reality, but instead shaped by the need to preserve emotional connection, stability, or meaning. Even when evidence suggests a different interpretation of what is actually occurring in the present moment, overall within experience and awareness itself internally and externally combined together, continuously shaping understanding gradually over time, naturally through repetition and emotional reinforcement cycles, forming deeper internal bias structures in perception itself. Repeatedly without conscious realization, fully occurring immediately in awareness, clearly always initially at first stage of experience, processing ongoing continuously in background awareness system, functioning silently beneath conscious recognition level, consistently throughout mental activity patterns occurring regularly within psychological framework of interpretation response mechanisms, overall functioning systemically in human cognition. Processes deeply integrated within emotional and perceptual filtering systems, operating simultaneously together in experience formation, continuously ongoing, always internally active, without interruption during awareness states normally experienced in daily life functioning. The psyche tries to bring awareness through discomfort, because discomfort is one of the most effective ways to capture attention when ordinary thoughts and feelings are being ignored or suppressed. The human mind is constantly processing emotional, cognitive, and sensory information, but not all of it reaches conscious awareness. When something important remains unrecognized or unresolved, the unconscious system increases internal tension as a form of signaling. This tension is experienced as unease, anxiety, restlessness, or emotional heaviness, even when there is no clear external cause. The purpose of this discomfort is not to harm, but to interrupt patterns of avoidance or denial. The psyche uses discomfort because calm states are often ignored, especially in modern life where distraction is constant. When everything feels comfortable, there is little motivation to reflect or change, so the unconscious introduces disturbance to break that inertia. This disturbance forces attention inward, where unresolved emotions or conflicts are stored. The mind then begins to search for meaning behind the discomfort, which gradually brings hidden material closer to awareness. This process is not immediate or direct. It unfolds through emotional signals, recurring thoughts, symbolic dreams, or sudden shifts in mood. Discomfort also acts as a balancing mechanism because unprocessed emotions create internal imbalance over time. The psyche attempts to restore equilibrium by making the individual aware of what has been ignored. However, because discomfort feels unpleasant, people often try to escape it quickly, not realizing that avoidance delays resolution. The more it is avoided, the more persistent it becomes, as the underlying issue remains unchanged. In this way, discomfort functions as both a signal and a pressure system, guiding awareness toward areas of psychological neglect. It continues until the message is acknowledged, understood, or integrated into conscious awareness, allowing the internal system to stabilize again naturally over time through recognition and acceptance of what was previously ignored within the inner emotional landscape, continuously operating beneath surface awareness levels in daily mental experience overall, functioning internally across thought and feeling processes, combined together in psychological structure of perception and meaning formation consistently throughout lived experience in ongoing awareness states. Silence and stillness reveal hidden truths because they remove the constant external noise that normally fills human attention. In everyday life, the mind is surrounded by distractions, conversations, media, responsibilities, and internal overthinking. This constant activity keeps awareness directed outward, preventing deeper emotions or unresolved thoughts from rising to the surface. When silence is introduced, both external and internal stimulation begin to decrease, and the mind can no longer rely on distraction to maintain balance. In this quieter state, suppressed thoughts, emotions, and subtle perceptions become more noticeable because there is less interference. The unconscious material that was previously buried begins to surface in the form of feelings, memories, or realizations that were not accessible during periods of mental activity. Stillness also slows down cognitive processing, allowing the mind to observe rather than react. This shift from reaction to observation creates space for deeper awareness to emerge. In silence, emotional patterns become clearer because they are no longer masked by immediate responses or external input. People often experience discomfort in silence because it exposes thoughts they usually avoid, including unresolved fears, desires, or internal conflicts. However, this discomfort is not created by silence itself, but by the awareness of what was already present beneath constant activity. Stillness functions like a mirror, reflecting internal states without distortion from external influence. It allows the mind to recognize recurring patterns that are otherwise hidden in daily busyness. Over time, this recognition can lead to insight as the individual begins to understand the structure of their own thoughts and emotions more clearly. Silence does not create truth, but it removes what conceals it, making underlying psychological content more accessible to conscious awareness in a direct and uninterrupted way that reveals what has been continuously operating beneath surface attention throughout normal mental functioning across everyday experience and perception processes consistently within internal awareness structures over time. Denial creates repetition of emotional cycles because it prevents the mind from fully processing experiences that carry discomfort, conflict, or unresolved meaning. When something painful or confusing happens, the psyche naturally attempts to integrate it into understanding so that it can be resolved and stored as completed experience. However, when denial is used, that integration is interrupted. The mind refuses to fully acknowledge what is actually felt or observed, and instead replaces it with a more acceptable version of reality. This temporary relief comes at a cost, because the underlying emotional material remains unprocessed. Since it is not resolved, the unconscious continues to hold it active in the background. Over time, this unresolved material seeks expression through repeated patterns, similar emotional situations, or recurring thoughts that resemble the original experience. The repetition is not random, but a psychological attempt to bring attention back to what was denied so it can finally be processed. Each repetition carries similar emotional tones, even if the external circumstances appear different, because the root issue has not changed. Denial also distorts learning because the mind cannot extract full meaning from an experience it refuses to acknowledge. As a result, the same emotional mistakes or relational dynamics may reappear in different forms, creating a cycle that feels familiar but difficult to escape. The psyche continues this repetition because unresolved content creates internal tension, and the system naturally seeks resolution to restore balance. However, denial interrupts this resolution process, keeping the cycle active. The stronger the denial, the more persistent the repetition becomes, as the unconscious increases the intensity or frequency of signals to overcome resistance. This is why individuals often feel like they are stuck in the same situation emotionally, even when external circumstances change, because the internal processing of that experience has never been completed or fully integrated into awareness and understanding within the psychological system, operating continuously beneath conscious recognition in everyday mental functioning and emotional experience over time. Awareness is the first step toward transformation, because nothing in the inner psychological world can truly change while it remains unconscious or unrecognized. The mind operates largely through automatic patterns formed by past experiences, emotional conditioning, and repeated interpretations of reality. These patterns continue to influence thoughts, feelings, and behaviors without requiring conscious effort, which is why people often find themselves reacting in familiar ways even when they intend to act differently. Awareness interrupts this automatic process by bringing attention to what is actually happening internally in the present moment. When a person becomes aware of a thought, emotion, or pattern as it arises, there is a shift from unconscious reaction to conscious observation. This shift creates space between stimulus and response, and in that space lies the possibility of change. Without awareness, behavior is driven entirely by repetition, meaning the same internal programs continue to run unchanged. With awareness, those programs become visible, and what is visible can be examined rather than blindly followed. This does not immediately erase patterns, but it reveals them clearly enough that they can no longer operate unnoticed. Awareness also reduces identification with thoughts and emotions, allowing a person to recognize them as experiences rather than absolute truths. This separation is essential for transformation because it prevents automatic belief in every mental impulse. Over time, consistent awareness weakens the intensity of old patterns, not by force, but by removing unconscious reinforcement. What is observed with clarity gradually loses its control over behavior because it is no longer hidden in the background of the mind. Transformation therefore begins not with change itself, but with the recognition of what exists internally. Once something is fully seen, it naturally begins to shift, because the mind cannot remain entirely the same in the presence of continuous conscious understanding of its own processes operating beneath awareness levels throughout ongoing psychological experience and internal reflection continuously unfolding within human cognition and emotional perception systems over time. As awareness deepens gradually into clearer self-observation states, consistently shaping behavior and understanding from within.